For many years, I worked in a mall. Well, sort of. It was one of those huge, faceless places with lots of escalators and multiple levels of shops and restaurants, dozens of brands you've definitely never heard of. It was the kind of place that hordes of families and couples and bored teenagers will flock to on the weekends. They might go to run errands, get a couple of gifts, buy a new pair of overpriced black jeans, or just walk around because, hell, it's probably the most interesting thing in town. Anyway, I didn't work at the mall per se. Rather, I worked inside the mall. Every morning, I would find some random spot to sit down, grab my cup of coffee, flip open my laptop, and connect to the mall Wi-Fi. You know how people always say it's dangerous to connect to open networks because some malicious hacker might steal all your data? Well, that's me. With a few lines of code, some basic malware, and a little bit of patience, I could very easily gain access to every scrap of information that passes through the air. By redirecting the traffic through a fake router, just my laptop running some software, I could see every credit card number, address, mother's maiden name, and first pet people typed in. I could look over their shoulders as they entered passwords, mess with their social media, manipulate what they saw on their screens, anything. To make most of my living, I'd usually set up and skim a couple of bucks off every transaction made at a particular store. I'd hit one store until I got bored and then move on to another without a trace. I would wait quietly, a ghost on the wires, sifting through the data like a miner panning for gold, looking for anything shiny before, bam, got one. Enough info to log into some random guy's bank account, drain it of a couple bucks, and route the money to one of my own secure accounts. It didn't matter who I stole from, and I didn't care either. If they were so stupid they couldn't make their account password something other than password, or use a PIN other than 1234, whose fault was it, really? People are so naive, and so damn easy to steal from. A couple dollars here and there wouldn't make too much of a difference to them, and meant that I could work for a couple hours a week. My biggest expenses besides my cheap single-bedroom apartment was the cost of driving to the mall, and maybe buying myself a latte so I'd have an excuse to sit there all day. I was riding up an escalator to find a new spot to work. My laptop was stuffed inside my backpack, bouncing lightly as I walked through a crowd of parents with strollers. Kids pressed up against the displays of shops filled with brightly colored shirts, expensive designer bags, organic beauty products, shiny new phones, and all kinds of other stuff. And most of it was knockoffs, overpriced faux designer products made in some factory in China. I made my way past several of these stores, glancing around for somewhere near to set up shop, before I saw a little spot tucked away that I hadn't seen before, what I'll just call the Pacific Cafe. Huh, I thought. Had it just been renovated or something? Maybe a new store. I stepped inside and glanced around the room to see it packed with lots of 20-somethings working on their laptops, earbuds in and sipping their lattes. The coffee shop seemed trendy and cool, and the music was all right, so I snagged a table in the corner under a couple photographs of palm trees and huts on a beach. I set down my bag. I walked up to the counter to order something. The barista behind the counter, who I later learned was the owner of the cafe, greeted me. He was a small man, maybe early 40s, with big, bright eyes and a wide smile that felt genuine. "Hey, how are you doing today?" His peppy demeanor caught me off guard and felt jarring compared to the typical unenthusiastic attitude of most mall employees. His voice sounded like something out of a commercial. I'm doing well. Can I get an iced latte with a pump of vanilla?" His smile grew wider. "Coming right up. Anything else?" "No, thank you. That's it." "Great. That'll be $2.05. He was so damn cheery. "Wait, $2? That's it?" His eyes wrinkled. "Yep. Amazing coffee and snacks for a great price." "Huh, that's great. Is this place new?" "Just opened last week, actually. I'm in the process of hiring some baristas right now." He chuckled to himself and rested his hand on his hips. "If you know anyone, make sure to pass along a resume. Or if you're a coffee lover yourself, we can train you." I laughed politely. "I actually work from here, or for myself, rather." "Oh, wow. Entrepreneur? Business owner? Self-employed?" Yeah, you could say that. I work in software." He nodded as he pulled his gaze away to start making my drink at the espresso bar. "Amazing field. The things you can do online these days. I was thinking of setting up a new system to order coffee in advance on your phone. So many interesting opportunities in tech these days." I smiled again and awkwardly stepped away, looking at my feet. I swiped my card and sat down. I liked the work I did, but it could be lonely sometimes to spend all day staring at a screen with little interaction. It felt isolating given I also lived alone and didn't really have any friends, so it was nice to just chat with someone for the first time in days. I was surprised to find the coffee was actually amazing, and for half the price of every other trendy coffee place. I opened my laptop and got to work, scanning for a good network to sift through. Pages of data sprawling before me. I was surprised to discover that the fastest network at the mall was the Pacific Cafe Open Wi-Fi, which was strange to say the least. I ran a few tests and found it was fast, like ridiculously fast. It must have been expensive as hell, as I couldn't fathom why the owner would need that kind of bandwidth. That kind of speed was hard to find anywhere, let alone in a random cafe. This was good though, because it meant that lots of people would hop on the network, which meant more data and money for me. The shop became more busy, and I set my bag in the seat across from me. After a few hours of sifting, I closed my laptop halfway and stood up to buy a snack. The scone I bought was good and similarly inexpensive. After the traffic online began to slow, I walked out just before the shop closed. The owner grinned broadly and waved me goodbye. I waved back and stepped out, feeling good about my day, having been productive and earned more than usual from the high volume of internet traffic. I smiled as I rode down the escalator. Soon, I became set in a routine. Every day I would walk into the Pacific Cafe, drop my stuff at the same table in the back, and order a drink and maybe a snack. I liked my spot in the corner because it was inconspicuous. There was also a storage closet or some door to my left that seemed to house ovens or whirring machines in a back area. The low, rumbling tone drowned out some of the chatter and music that sometimes felt overwhelming. And the food. My God, the food. The food and drinks were amazing, and I almost had to stop myself from buying a couple treats throughout the day. It would cut into my profit margins. After a while, I limited myself to only buying something for breakfast and lunch, but again, it was so cheap it didn't matter. I came back every day for a month. The atmosphere was great, and I even started talking to some of the other regulars. A little bit of small talk, then I would offer to buy them a cup of coffee, and we would sit together to talk about whatever they were working on. If they asked me, I would always just say I worked from home as a coder and leave it at that. However, I soon began to notice something odd about the shop. Sometimes during the week, the network would slow to a crawl for a few hours as an unknown host unplugged huge amounts of data to a server. What was even more strange was the fact that all the data was heavily encrypted. This meant I couldn't see what was being sent directly, but after running some data forensics, it appeared it was sending hundreds of photos and videos and massive files with troves of data. Who was using the network? What could it possibly be sending? Perhaps something pirated, illegal, or maybe valuable. You could sell all kinds of data on certain parts of the internet for plenty of money. I started neglecting my usual work to unravel this mystery. I tried a few tactics to unmask the data. I ran a few powerful programs to decrypt it with brute force, but no dice. I could see file names, but they were all long strings of letters and numbers, gibberish with no discernible pattern. About a week later, the network began to slow again, and I fired up a few new programs. Terminals and programs covered my screen, and the fans in my laptop whirred. I worked quickly, trying a new way to reverse engineer the encryption keys before. "Hey, anything I can get for you this afternoon?" I glanced at the time. I had already been there for hours but hadn't bought anything. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just really busy. Can I get an almond milk latte with a double shot of espresso?" The owner smiled, his eyes locked unblinking with mine. "Of course. I'll have that ready for you in a sec." I looked back to my screen and tried to remember what I had been doing. I finished a few lines of code on the open terminal and hit enter. New windows opened, and the reverse encryption program began to work its magic. I sat back and leaned my head against the wall, my eyes tracking the loading bar's progress. I turned my head to watch the owner make my latte. He saw me watching him and flashed his usual, odd smile. And that's when I heard it. A small, muffled scratching from what seems to be behind the wall. I pressed my ear to the drywall near the closet door and heard only the low thud of machines and what almost sounded like voices. I was interrupted by a ding as the programs on my screen instantly closed and a new terminal window opened with a wall of numbers and letters. The encryption key! I typed furiously, my fingers flying over the keyboard to begin the process of decrypting at least a few of the folders. Soon, it was ready. I hit enter again and waited. I stepped up to the counter for what was my second almond milk latte of the day. The owner smiled and stared at me intently. "Anything else I can get you?" "Yeah, I'll have the same double-shot latte with almond milk, please." I tossed a few dollars from my wallet and looked back to my computer. "No problem, coming right up. Maybe a bite to eat as well?" He smiled devilishly and gestured to the case of danishes and scones. Sure, why not? I'll take a scone. 2, actually." The shop was quiet that day, with only a few people working silently. The same lo-fi music played softly, and I tapped my fingers on the counter. I had a few minutes waiting for the program, so I decided to make some small talk. The owner seemed friendly enough. "You guys make all this stuff yourselves?" "Yep, we make all our almond milk, pastries, and other treats fresh every day, right in the back of the store." "Oh, I didn't realize you made everything. We grind all our coffee using imported premium beans and mix quality ingredients to make our food using our brand new baking area and large ovens." He laughed as he flipped a switch on the espresso machine. I smiled, but all I could think about was seeing what someone wanted hidden. "We're actually thinking about ordering a couple more. We're making a lot of extra snacks and breakfast items in the back that we managed to sell to other shops here in the mall." I nodded absently and stared off towards the bathroom so I wouldn't have to make eye contact. I glanced back towards my computer. "Here you go." "Thanks." I sat down and set my drink aside. I scrolled through pages of folders with bizarre names, my eyes passing from one folder to the next, looking for a pattern, anything. Each folder was large, and they were arranged in no particular order. The owner set down a plate with my scones and I jumped. "Here you go. Just took these out of the oven." He grinned, but the smile melted away after a moment. "Everything okay? You seem stressed." Yeah, I'm okay. Just gotta get some stuff done before a deadline." I scratched my eyebrows quickly and flashed a weak smile. He smiled back politely, but I could see something different. Something new flashing briefly in his eyes. I probably imagined it. He turned his gaze at the customers in line. I went back to scrolling. Endless pages of folders with incoherent names sprawled in front of me until I saw it. A folder simply named Recordings with the current date. Intrigued, I opened it. A page of images loaded, each several hundred megabytes large, so I knew they were high-quality photos. I double-clicked the first one and used some image software to open them as a slideshow. The first picture was of the Pacific Cafe, taken from somewhere up high, like a security camera or something. The counter and espresso bar took up most of the frame. The owner stood behind the counter looking at a customer as he handed back a few bills with a smile. I clicked past it. The next few images were also taken from some kind of security camera and shown what was the back room, a small kitchen with racks of pastries, limited counter space, and a big oven. Why the hell were these all being uploaded? Why not put all these stupid pictures on a hard drive? The owner stood, back facing the camera as he removed something from the oven. I clicked past several photos before they changed. My heart dropped, and I couldn't understand what I was looking at. All the pictures showed the same dimly lit room, maybe a basement or storage room. 2 young kids sat on a dirty floor, squinting up at the flashing of a camera. Their clothes were tattered. They didn't look like they had showered in years. Around them were several large shadows of something obscure in the background. What the fuck? I fought the urge to throw up in my mouth. Why were they all kids? As I scrolled through more pictures, the angle changed. More kids. Different kids this time. The camera moved closer to their faces to capture a look of pain and terror. They were so young. Tears streamed down their faces, extending bloodied, raw hands covered in a white powder. This couldn't be real. I closed my laptop. I leaned back in my chair and tried to take a breath. My heart was pounding painfully in my chest. As I slowly lifted my gaze, my eyes met his. He was staring at me, his big, bright eyes burning into me, as if he somehow knew. He turned and went back to wiping counters. I took the rest of the day off. I drove back to my apartment and stared at the ceiling for hours. I didn't know exactly what I had seen. I don't know what to do, or who to even go to. I went through the motions for a few days, gathering only tidbits of stolen information, and eventually took a few days off. I came back the next week, determined to do something. I had to make myself look. I put on my headphones to focus. I opened the folder again and clicked on the last image I had seen. I flicked past them quickly, trying not to spend too long looking at each picture. What is he doing with them? I thought. Why would anyone do something like this? I forced myself to look again and again, putting aside my anxiety and swallowing the rising bile in my throat. I navigated back to the folder and opened it. While the first images had shown the kids sitting on the floor of the same large, dimly lit room, now wearing clean aprons. More pictures showed them crying, but covered in more white powder, which I realized was flour. What were they doing? What were these sick bastards making them do? But as I scrolled through more pictures and short videos, I suddenly realized that they were cooking. Faces crying, chains wrapped around their small arms, they worked and folded the dough into bread, then cut into slices for sandwiches. I could almost hear the echo of their cries. I could almost hear the echoes of their cries in my mind. Some of them looked older, maybe 10 or so, but most looked younger. They wore the same aprons marked with a small logo that I recognized instantly, the Pacific Cafe. Grainy pictures from behind showed them crying as they stacked and loaded dozens of trays into industrial ovens. Others showed them as they stared dead ahead, eyes glazed, skin gray, and bodies thin as they worked large mixers to grind coffee beans. Who were these kids? Where were they from? My breathing grew heavier as I clicked and scrolled and stared. Now they stood leaning next to rusty, exposed pipes, hands scarred and faces bloodied. Twisted smiles sat on their lips as they sat in squalor, working and baking. At times they appeared to be laughing, but their eyes showed they were anything but happy. They never looked directly into the camera, always just above as if they were looking at someone. And there he was. In a few photos I found, the owner stood with them, making cakes and pastries, grinning at his little worker bees, a determined smile always stretched across his face. I closed my laptop halfway and stood up quickly. My heart hammered in my chest as I strolled over to the bathroom nervously, careful not to look at anyone. I tried the door, but it was occupied. I stood outside, tapping my foot and staring at the wall. My eyes passed over a sheet lazily taped next to the door. It showed a floor plan with the fire exits marked for emergencies. As I regarded it, I noticed something unusual. It showed the entrance, the main room with seats and the espresso bar, a tiny back room behind the counter, and a small hallway I was currently standing in leading to 2 restrooms. What I didn't see, however, was an indication of the door to the left of where I sat. No closet marked, no doorway, no room, nothing. And yet I knew there was a door there that should have been marked. Wheels began turning in my head and the hairs stood straight up my spine. The dimly lit room was... I moved out of the hallway and sat back down at my chair next to the unmarked door. I stared at the hundreds of folders and files in front of me, each brimming with more sickening, disturbing images. How many were there? How many had there been? I swallowed hard and I knew I was on the verge of tears. I threw on my headphones and got back to work. I scrolled through images, copying them into my own computer. I stopped caring about any precautions. I had to do something, save something. Copying and pasting and copying and pasting. I added the dark collection to my own encrypted folder on my hard drive, moving quickly as I could because I wasn't sure how much longer the connection would last and I'd be able to see the files. Copy and pasting and copy and pasting. I clicked through more images, more kids, more tired, bruised faces that I struggled to look at, copying and pasting until the sound of a lock clicking. My heart sank to the pit of my stomach. I looked up to see there was no one left in the cafe, except for the owner. He finished locking the door and flipped the open sign to closed. He turned back to me and walked over, smiling. "Everything all right?" I slammed the laptop shut quickly like I was a reflex, and he sank into the chair across from me. He smiled his usual odd smile, his gaze unflinching and bright eyes locked on me. That was when I knew that he knew. I cleared my throat and tried to say something, anything. I'm really tired and my deadline is His hands clasped in front of me. He leaned forward, closer to my face. He cocked his head to the side, his expression almost sympathetic. "You don't seem all right." He moved closer, and I clenched my hands nervously, overwhelmed with hate and disgust. His smile suddenly flipped into a frown, and he looked at me, confusion slowly passing over his face. He removed a phone from his pocket. He turned the screen towards me, eyes still locked onto mine, and he smiled. "I know what you've been doing." He smiled wider. "I can see everything you do here." He pushed his phone towards me, and I looked down. On his phone was a picture of my computer's screen. It showed what I had been looking at only seconds before. My desktop with terminals and folders opened as I copied hundreds of decrypted files. Lines of credit card numbers and social security numbers sat exposed in a separate window. I sat there, my mouth open. My lips trembled and eyes watered. He clicked the power button and I was left staring at my own horrified expression, the screen a black mirror. I looked down at my hands. I tried to think of something to say, but I could barely croak out a single word. "Oh, why?" He smiled wider and set down his phone gingerly on the table. He glanced around before leaning forward and speaking in a conspiratorial whisper. "Want to know my secret? I promise I'll keep yours if you can keep mine." His white teeth shone as his bright eyes were empty. I nodded slowly. "The most expensive part of any business is staffing. Coffee is an especially hard business. Good people are so hard to come by." He chuckled softly. I felt a chill run down my spine. Coffee is expensive and we have to cut costs to be competitive. He leaned back a bit, keeping his eyes locked on mine. Hundreds of children go missing every year, and there are thousands more orphans around the country that nobody wants and nobody misses them. He frowned and shook his head. That's the thing. They can't all just live in foster homes or on the streets. Gotta have a heart, some compassion. They need to survive, but can't get regular jobs, obviously. So I let them sleep here, feed them enough, give them a little cash every week. He sipped his coffee casually, his smile growing wider by the second. It's great. They work all day in the back at 6 days a week. With my wage bill so low, I can offer low prices and great quality. To make some extra to pay for their clothes and bedding, people on certain corners of the dark web pay lots of money for that kind of thing. He was giddy with excitement, and his eyes flickered with a sadistic joy. His hands moved to grab mine, but softly. Don't feel bad, okay? You know how valuable data can be. You know what it's like. Scraping by, trying to make some money in the world today. I stared down at my feet and mumbled slowly. But I don't do that sort of thing. It suits everyone, he continued. They can work here and it helps them. They wouldn't have anything otherwise. Poor kids. I continued to stare at my feet, noticing how much my entire body was quivering as tears streamed down my face. He began to stand up and push in the chair. It helps them, they help me. I make money so I can keep helping them. And you get a bargain. I couldn't bring myself to look at him. He stepped around the table to stand behind me. I felt him move next to me, his head by my ear as he whispered more quietly now. I'm glad we could clarify things. Keep my little secret. He dangled his phone inches from my face. And I'm sure I can keep yours. He grabbed me on the shoulder and squeezed it. Speaking normally, he asked, Another coffee, buddy? Snack, maybe? We'll be closing pretty soon, so this one will be on the house. He gave another cold and motionless chuckle and walked back behind the counter. I sat and stared at my feet. After a few minutes, I slid my laptop into my backpack and walked out of the cafe in a daze for what I knew would be the last time. Weren't these jobs and the shelter better than nothing? What he was doing was illegal and wrong, but the same thing happens all the time, just thousands of miles away. I got home and sobbed. I stared at the ceiling and wished it would collapse and crush me. I sat alone for days, scarcely speaking or eating, only thinking and staring at my computer. The cursor of the login screen blinked endlessly. I sat, frozen, doing nothing, but wishing I would do anything. I'm a fucking coward. I don't know how to help. Not going there anymore would be better for me and for those kids, but it wouldn't fix anything. It wouldn't really help them. I didn't know how to help them. I saw them in my dreams. I heard their soft voices and whimpers echoing and swirling in my mind. I would listen to them crying out, and there was nothing I could do. I would wake up every night crying and shaking. I couldn't bear it. After a few days, I just broke. I opened my laptop. I logged in, opened a browser, and found a form to send an anonymous tip to the FBI. I compressed the photos, put them in a folder, and attached them to my report. I listed the address and all the information I could find about the Pacific Cafe and clicked send. I knew my life was over, but I couldn't do it anymore. I waited and waited for a response, anything at all. But that evening, I received a notification that my request had been processed and that law enforcement in my area had been alerted. I nearly cried with relief. The son of a bitch would pay, and he would die in prison. I hacked into the security cameras of the cafe easily, and sat watching the feed until the morning. I didn't look at the video of the back room. I couldn't. I watched as the owner unlocked the door and began his day. He moved calmly from room to room, turning on the espresso machine, putting on music, and walking to that awful back room to get that day's coffee and pastries. I nearly smiled when the police special unit broke through the glass and pinned him to the floor. Heavily armored officers with rifles knocked over tables and chairs, kicking down doors and smashing cabinets, until they found the door. Several officers filed inside quickly. I was terrified for what they would surely discover. I glanced at the figure being handcuffed on the floor. I swear that, for an instant, he almost seemed to look up at the security camera and smile one last evil grin. Like he knew I was watching. His dead eyes stared into mine one last time, and although it was faint, I knew he was laughing. Head forced to the ground and his mouth bleeding, he still laughed, and he still wore that same sick smile. Some of the officers walked back into the main seating area, but with nothing. Where the hell were the kids? One of the officers walked towards them, exchanged some words, and then they moved casually towards the owner on the ground. What had he done with the kids? I quickly switched the camera feed to the back room and was shocked to see it was empty. There were several large industrial ovens and grinders, but no kids tied to the pipes exposed on the wall. Had he moved them? Where did he put them? A few officers milled around with flashlights, taking pictures and speaking to each other. My blood boiled and I screamed. I threw my laptop across the room and smashed into the ground until it broke into pieces. Even with what I had done, he had won. And now I sit in my apartment, several days later, writing all of this on my phone to document everything that's happened. I know they're going to come for me soon. The awful people that he works for. The powerful people that pay good money for those pictures on the darkest corners of the internet. I know that soon the police or the FBI or the NSA are going to come breaking down my door and drag me away somewhere. But I don't care anymore. All I can see now are all those images burned in my brain, all of their faces looping endlessly. I just want them to stop. So I'll just sit here, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my time to come. Or maybe I'll be gone. Gone like I never even existed. Like that man or those kids never even existed. A shadow, creeping and gone without a trace. Something invisible and unseen. A ghost on the wires.